Are you a consulting business owner seeking a better way to scale to your next million in revenue? Accelerate Sales Podcast features other experts who have cracked the code to predictable revenues with proven sales systems that quickly increase revenue and get you on the fast track back to doing what you do best. Now let's accelerate your sales with today's episode.
Welcome to the Accelerate Sales Podcast. If you're a first-time listener and you love what you hear, please subscribe. And if you're a regular, thanks for your support. So today we've got some big news and something a little bit unique. I've got my coach and mentor, Melanie Benson, on the show today. She's from the Amplify Your Success Podcast, and she's actually going to turn the tables. That's right. She's going to interview me about a big change that's happening in my world regarding my podcast. So, Melanie, great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And this is going to be really fun. I'm super excited for today, and nice to meet everyone in the community today.
Brilliant.
So, Paul, you have big news. You have decided to do a brand refresh on your podcast. Let's go a little bit behind the scenes and tell people why you're doing it now.
Yeah, well, look, I think I'm up to about this is roughly, just over 300 episodes. And I've had a couple of brand changes. So the first one, I was corporate escapees. That's when I was one, right? I left corporate in 2011 and, I built my business, learned lots of lessons, and I wanted to give back because I couldn't find anyone, a podcast anywhere that actually covered that topic. And as I evolved for that, I'm like, well, I'm no longer an escapee, right? I'm now someone that's really earned their stripes in running my own business. So then we moved it to my brand, which is Build, Live, Give, and build a great business to live a good life and give back. And that's my philosophy. That's how I live my life. But really, that brand, it's not something you're going to search, right? It doesn't pick up any SEO, or you go into a podcast and you're thinking, I want to look at a certain topic. You're not going to find Build, Live, Give. And that's when you came along and said, well, look, it's a great philosophy, but is it a good brand for your podcast? Maybe not. So that's when, with your great guidance, we talked about some ways to improve that. And that's where we came up with Accelerate Sales, which is very much linked to my current program, which is called the Accelerate Sales Program.
Yeah, that's it's a big thing. Like, I want to just normalize this for a minute. Like, I worked with so many podcasters, and I hear from all kinds of podcasters that, a couple of years in, they start to realize that maybe the conversation I thought I wanted to have in the beginning isn't the conversation that my audience and my listeners are craving and asking for now. And I just want to give you kudos for really tuning into the audience and listening to what they're excited to hear more about. And obviously, as a sales mentor, as somebody who's really good at helping people accelerate revenues into their business, of course, we want to hone in and pick up on that in the podcast and the brand of the podcast and the episodes that are going to be coming forward on the podcast, right?
Yeah. And look, I've sort of, to be honest, I've struggled a little, and your guidance has helped because I'm really a jack of all trades in some ways. I've had 18 years experience at Coca-Cola, one of the best run companies in the world. So I learned a lot there. Then I've, built and sold my own tech business. I've had a virtual, or an outsourcing business that I've run and sold. And I've also, helped lots of people. So I've got, lots of things that I can help with, but people don't buy when they're confused, and people don't buy lots of things, right? So that's where I've really decided to focus in on sales strategy as the entry point. Really make sure, because most consulting business owners, that's where they struggle. They've sort of had referrals in the past. The world's now with COVID has turned more online, and they're like, well, my networking, my going, presenting at events, all of those things have stopped. So therefore, my leads have stopped. And how do I get those back? So that's where I start. So that's where we've got the Accelerate Sales Program. But then often it turns into, once they fix their sales, then I turn into more of a business mentor. But I think it was hard for me to tell people, look, I'm going to customize and I'm going to help you with everything. And they're like, well, I'm investing a big amount of money here. What do I really get? And I think that's where focusing now on sales and accelerating people's sales is what we've landed on.
So here's what I love about this, and I'm really excited that you're able to share this with the listening community, because what you just explained is a very common evolution of a business owner. Is we can do so many things, like what should I focus on? And what you're doing, and I think is great advice for anyone listening in who sells a service of any kind, that is to recognize you have to open the relationship by giving somebody what they really need. And almost everybody needs more sales, right? And then once you solve the big pain point and you give people a formula and a roadmap, which you're so brilliant at, to getting the acceleration of sales, then you can start to look at, well, what's really going on that's causing the lack of sales, or causing maybe a breakdown that's keeping more sales from coming in. That's when you get to open up wider and give them more of what I think I said that backwards. You got to start with what they want and then give them what they need, right? So, starting with what they want, I want more sales, and then getting to what they need is a brilliant way to be of masterful service. But also, this is where I shine, is to really position your authority, because that really is where you have an authority, you have massive credibility. And I think that's a great place to start. So, I thought it would be really interesting for your listeners to maybe learn a little bit more about you and behind the scenes today, since we've turned the tables and I've nabbed the mic from you. And I don't know if you get this question as much as I do, Paul, but I get asked all the time, how long you've been podcasting and why did you start your podcast? I think it'd be great to share that with your community today. So why did you start your podcast, and how long has it been going now?
Yeah, look, I've been a voracious learner, since about 16. Obviously school, you're there to learn, but I always had a fascination with learning more. So my own personal development. So that's where it sort of started. Fast forward, every time I used to move, and we moved a lot with Coca-Cola, I had this massive collection of books that I used to haul around from house to house. And you can see some of them there behind me now. But believe me, it was like a room full of books, because I'd buy a book almost every week, and, I'd read a book a week. And then with my condition, which is called polycystic kidney disease, and, I've recently had a transplant, I just couldn't stay awake. I won't go into the detail of that, but effectively it's hard. So books, I was constantly dropping a book on my head because I was falling asleep all the time. So long story short, found podcasting, and it was just brilliant. It's like, okay, now I've got one small device that I can carry all my knowledge around in. And I'm a quick learner, so I can listen at 2.5 times speed. So I'm a lot quicker at listening than what I am at reading. So I was like, this is just perfect. So as I was listening to all different podcasts, and John Lee Demas from Entrepreneurs on Fire was one of the first ones I listened to, that's when I realized that there was a gap in the market, that no one was really talking to people that left corporate to run their own business. And that's why I started Corporate Escapees. And it was in May 2017 now that I first started it. So
we're over 3 years. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good track record for the podcasting world, with Podfade at an all-time high. And Podfade, for if you're listening and you're like, what's Podfade? Podfade is basically, you start this great idea. It's kind of like a bright, shiny object syndrome, and you get bored with it and it kind of fades away. And, one of the things you didn't say, Paul, and I'm kind of curious about, is how, for many of us, we start a podcast because we're obsessed with a topic, or we really want to have conversations and share them with the world. We want to share our knowledge and our wisdom. And in my experience, having a podcast is a great way to demonstrate to a potential client how you can help them solve the problem. It's like, there's no better way to research and get to know a potential mentor or service provider than listening to them on a podcast, because it's literally like you're building that know, like, and trust factor as you're driving across town or at the gym listening to your podcast and the conversations you're having. How do you see that fitting in terms of your podcast?
Yeah, look, when people reach out to me on LinkedIn, because to be honest, as a podcast host, you do get some great engagement, but you don't always know. So you got thousands of people listening to each show, but you don't really know who exactly is listening. It's not like a LinkedIn post where you can see who's liked it. That doesn't exist in the podcast world. So when someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn, as an example, I always ask, how did you come across me before I accept the connection? Was it through one of my posts or was it listening to my podcast? And I'm amazed how often people say, listening to your podcast. So then I get on the first call with them and they typically say, look, I feel like I know so much about you because they have listened to hours of content, hopefully valuable content for them, but hours of valuable content, through listening to my podcast. And I think that's just such an invaluable resource where people talk about, like, know, and trust you. I know myself, I've picked mentors that have had podcasts, and the way that I've got comfortable and the way that I've ended up choosing to go with them is based on the fantastic knowledge that they've given freely through their podcast. And that's why I think podcasts are such a valuable asset if you're a thought leader or an expert in an area, to give people the ability, to know more about you, but most importantly, to actually have some wins based on the information you're giving them.
3 out of 5 of my clients listen to at least 5 to 7 episodes before they decide to hire me. They've admitted to me, they kind of stalk me online a bit to make sure I'm real. And I think, we are real. You're very authentic with your what you share, and you're very authentic with your stories. And I know you come from your heart, and that's a big part of your brand philosophy. And there's no better way to really connect with potential listeners and other people you can collaborate with than having your own podcast. So, Paul, we've talked about this a little bit over our time together, but I think there's a lot of value in sharing learnings and lessons, because having a podcast, I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's like great to have a podcast. It's like being an author, but there's a lot that goes into it. And there's a lot we learn from having our own podcast. What do you think have been 3 of the biggest lessons, maybe even painful, costly lessons that you learned as a podcast host that you think would be helpful for the audience to learn?
Look, I think the first one, and it's a pretty obvious one, but it's get out of the production as quick as you can. Okay, so, fortunately for me, I never actually got into editing my own, but someone told me the other day, and you could validate this, Melanie, that it's like for every 30 minutes, it's like 4 hours of editing if you're doing it yourself, right? It's not as if you do it every day. So the number one thing is don't edit your own podcast. The second is try to get out of show notes as quick as you can as well. I remember that, I love the conversations, and then it was like an instant downer that I'd have to go and, write the show notes, and I'd take such an enormous amount of time. And, I'm trying to help people with sales. I'm not doing enough selling myself because I'm so bogged down in the production side of it. So that's probably the first lesson that I'd share. You can find, I've got great people if you want to reach out, but there's people that can do it now. They do it for a living, and it's a lot more affordable. And the opportunity cost of your time of doing it versus them, hands down, get someone else to do it.
By the way, I totally agree with that one. I'm always about do the thing that only you can do and get everything else off your plate as quickly as you can. So that's point 1. What's point 2?
Yeah. The second is be really ruthless on who you have on the show, especially if you've got an interview show, obviously. So, I must admit that early on, anyone that was, virtually walking past me, I grabbed to have on the show. And, that's good for numbers, but it's not good for your audience. And really make sure that, the people that you have on the show are actually adding value to your audience. So I get pitched all the time to have people on my shows, and I'm very selective now on who gets on the show based on the value that they're going to provide the audience. So I think, really set out, clearly, and, someone like Melanie can help you do this, exactly what your strategy is, what value you want to add to your audience, who your audience is, and then make sure that your guests align to that.
That's a good point. And I think there's a very normal first phase of having a podcast where you're kind of like, I'll take any guest. I just need guests. And then you realize you've got to be a little bit discerning. And I really applaud that for you. And I'm actually excited to see the guests that you bring on and to see what shifts as you fine tune the conversation to accelerating sales, because that's a really exciting conversation to have. So I can't wait to see what happens. All right. What's point 3? What's the third thing you learned?
And just very quickly on that. So, Build, Live, Give was great, but what it meant that it was quite broad, so go back. There's lots of value in the podcast, so you can go back and listen to them. But, the key, I think, was now that it's more focused on sales, and it's not, I'll do a quick summary of someone's background, but it's not going through a whole lot of background that most people listen and look, it's okay, but what you really want is actionable content. And that's what leads to my third point. A, make it entertaining. But B, make sure that it's actionable, that, think if you're listening to this podcast, what would you do as a result of it? And I think lining up those perfect guests that got knowledge that your audience needs, and then making sure that they give actionable content and they don't just give a nice conversation. They actually make sure that they're sharing something that not many people in the world know, and it's something that you can add to your toolkit to improve your sales and improve your business.
Yeah, I love that. Great learnings, great ones to share, applicable in a lot of different ways. I want to tune in here to the possibility that someone might be listening into this today and knowing they want to accelerate their sales, recognizing it's a great credibility booster and that there's a know, like, and trust factor that gets built. And it's a great positioning tool to get in front of ideal clients and prospects, and even like open up other referral partners and things like that. So if someone who is maybe your ideal client, they're wanting to accelerate sales to their business, was considering starting a podcast, what advice might you give to them to help them decide if that's the right direction to help with the visibility side of accelerating sales?
Yeah, well, look, I think the obvious one is don't try to do it all by yourself. So walk in the steps of giants, or whatever that saying is. So I think that's really important. But I think really research your audience. So really, understand, is your audience your target market? Do they listen to podcasts? How frequently? What are the topics? Who else do they listen to? Why? So I think researching the audience is critical. Then, have that strategy. So what is your strategy and how does it relate to your business? Okay, because I probably started it because I loved podcasting and I saw a gap in the market, but I wasn't clear enough on, well, what is the link to my business from the podcast? So I think getting that strategy right, and that will get you past, I think it's 6 to 10 episodes that a lot of people fail because, podcasting is a long game. It can take, 3 years for me, but really the first 12 months took a lot of time that you've got to dedicate. So don't think you'll get immediate results. So the clearer the strategy, you'll know what the end game is. So then if the results aren't right when you first launch it, you actually know what the end game is. The next one is make sure you really make the guests comfortable before they come on. So we have a really great process. So most of our guests that come on say, look, it's one of the best experiences I've had. But we've done that based on all the podcast guesting I've been on, where the host really doesn't do a great job to bring the best out of who's the interviewee. So I think making sure that you spend, 5 to 10 minutes and really being clear on what the value is and making sure that they're comfortable before they go to air. I've already talked to this, but it relates to the strategy. Just be patient, right? It does take time for the podcast. And, you'll look at your download numbers and think, these just aren't where I want it to be. But remember, there are hundreds of conversations that you're having with people that you wouldn't normally have for something that is very scalable. So be patient in how long it takes. Always recommend a solo and an interview, because in an interview, you want to shine the light on the guest, but in a solo, you want to actually display your expertise. So I think a balance of those two is good. I don't like the people that try to, always double up, or if someone says something, they try to go one better in an interview. It's like, no, shine it on the guest, have the solo. And the last one is use video. I took too long to switch to video and audio. I was comfortable doing audio. I used to always love to take lots of notes. So video is so important, so you can repurpose that video. And I think it makes it so much easier to be across multiple social platforms if you've got the video assets.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the video part because in a lot of industries, video is what people connect with the most. But having the audio version as well as the video version gives people options. And do you mind if I just share one of my colossal mistakes that I made when I first started podcasting? Because it's really relevant here.
Go for it.
Yeah. So when I first started my podcast 9 years ago, it was a different podcast, and I was given the advice to have a video podcast. Well, that was before all of the technology, live streaming and everything was available. And so I had a video podcast that was being distributed on Apple. Well, nobody wanted to watch a video on their phone at the time. So it was just a colossal meltdown for me. And it was a very expensive show to produce. And now we have so many great options. It's so much easier. I tell people all the time, create the video, pull the audio, and then you've got both platforms handled. So I wish I would have started that video podcast 5 years later when video was at an all-time high in usage. So I love your advice. It's so good. And, I was just listening to you speak and I'm realizing that, one of the best parts of having a podcast, especially if you're going to interview peers and even competitors for that matter, is sometimes those people end up becoming your clients because as you were talking about that 10-minute of building rapport and connection with the guest, sometimes, and I'm sure you've had this happen, those conversations are so powerful. They end up going, wait, how do I work with you? Like, how do you help me solve my problems? So I love that strategy a lot. I think everybody benefits from having time connecting before they go into the conversation.
Yeah. And it's also a great way to reach out to people as well, because you're giving them enormous value first. So, by interviewing them, giving them a great asset that they can share to build their profile. And particularly, a lot of people don't know what to put on some of their socials. You're giving them a brilliant asset. And then, yes, roughly 10% of my clients have come from my podcast guests. So, it's a great strategy as well.
Well, I hate to say this out loud, but maybe that might change. We might be putting that closer to 50% in the future, right, Paul?
I hope so.
Okay, good. So, this is a big decision, and I don't think it's one that you took lightly. Like, I know you really, you want the best for the people that you serve. You want to create great content. Like, you are a master and you are so committed to getting really valuable conversations out there that are going to inspire people. And so changing the brand when you're very entrenched in it is not always an easy decision. What do you think was the hardest part for you in deciding to rebrand and change the direction of the conversations that you've been having?
Yeah, well, look, I was pleasantly surprised at how much the brand meant to my listeners. So I surveyed them and asked them, look, I'm looking to make this change. And, they actually said, look, we do love, we're torn, right? We love the brand Build, Live, Give. It's exactly what you stand for. But also we can sort of acknowledge that it's probably too broad and it doesn't, best describe what you do. So, yeah, it's something that, is very close to me. I love the brand. But, I knew, and thanks to your nudging, I knew that I had to make a change. So I think it was great to know that people loved Build, Live, Give, but also I think people knew that it wasn't specific enough. And, one of the other hardest things is all the logistics of the change. So, you just say, I'm going to change the podcast, but what that's led to, I launched my personal brand called paulhigginsmentoring.com. So in a way, I've got two websites. I've got, buildlivegive.com and paulhigginsmentoring.com. So that was confusing, but now means that with the podcast change and going just to paulhigginsmentoring.com, we've got a huge amount of logistics in the back end to change everything from buildlivegive.com as the main domain. So, my team are got some work ahead of them, but it'll all be for the better because I do think it's the right decision.
Yeah. And I think there's I've been through 3 rebrands in my 21 years of business. So I know the pain of rebranding. And I think one of the things that happens though, is the sense of alignment gives you more confidence, more power, and more expansive energy. And it just changes the dynamics. And I know that's really going to juice up the power behind the conversations that you're going to be bringing out through the podcast as you move forward, because you're just tuning more and more and more into a message that was already there. But now you're like putting it out there. It's like, yep, this is what we do here. So I love it. I think one of the things that happens when we go through big changes with our podcast, right? Like our community's like, wait, what's happening? Right. Everybody wants to stay connected and be a part of what's coming next. And I love that you asked all of the community and Build, Live, Give, like, what do they want and what do they resonate with? And so now we're taking you on this new journey of the Accelerate Sales. I'm sure the listeners like me want to celebrate with you and want to help make this a big success in this pivot. How can the listener today do something to help you make this a massively exciting and successful brand pivot?
Yeah, look, I'd love for all of you to subscribe. So that would be the first thing if you haven't subscribed already. And I know that a lot of you have, so really appreciate that. But you can go to paulhigginsmentoring.com/podcast, subscribe. And also I'd love a review. So reviews, whether it be on Apple, which I think it's rebranded. What's it called now, Mel?
It's Apple Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts, that's right. It used to be called iTunes or whatever it was.
Right.
But yeah, Apple Podcasts. So please leave a review there or on Spotify. That would be fantastic. And if you do, and I'd love for you to do that, please send me a photo of the review, because sometimes, the name you use isn't always obvious on the review. So I'd love to thank you, but I'd also love to do more than that. I'd love to give you a free LinkedIn makeover. So, if you go to my profile, a lot of people say, look, your profile resonates so well. And often it's just the last thing you get around to doing. You're so busy that you don't get around to do it. So I'd love to do that for you. So this is valued of $1,000 USD. I normally charge for this, but if any of you send a review, do it. Send a photo of the review. That's what I'll do. I'll do a LinkedIn makeover for you, and that will just make it so much easier for people to know exactly what you do, who you help, and most importantly, make it easier for you to get some new clients.
I love it. That's so generous of you. And what a fantastic prize. Like, and a big makeover on your LinkedIn profile has such a huge impact on that first impression that clients and potential partners and even employees and candidates that you're considering bringing on into your company. It makes such a huge difference to have a really, really great LinkedIn profile. So that's massively valued. And you do have a great LinkedIn profile. And I'm going to just up the ante for you a little bit. And I would love as you're listening in today, what's one thing you love the most about this show? Put it in the review, but really let's give Paul some great buzz and momentum. Pop onto his LinkedIn page. And when you see this episode air, you'll see a link to it. He'll post it there. Tell him in the comments one thing that you love about Paul's show or this episode, if this one really resonated with you. So I just wanted to up the ante for you there a little bit, Paul, because this is exciting. We all want to celebrate you. I can't wait to celebrate you. I can't wait to share it on social media for you, because I'm really excited to see you having the courage to take this to a much more authentically aligned conversation. So big high fives. Well done.
Yeah, I better not ghost you on that one. But yes, look, thanks for your support. It's been invaluable. I know we're going to be working together more. And if anyone has got an existing podcast and they know that it's just not achieving, so you're putting in a lot of effort, that's not achieving the results that you want, I'd certainly recommend reaching out to Melanie. So all the links to her LinkedIn profile, her website, etc., will be in the show notes as well. So Melanie, thanks for turning the tables. It's actually nice for a change to be on the other side of the seat, but really enjoyed the experience of this change that we're making. I'm so excited about the change that we're moving forward. And thanks for coming on and sharing some of your wisdom today.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun to put you in the hot seat and ask you all the questions and help your listeners get to know you a little bit better. So enjoy, everybody, and great work, Paul. Keep that great momentum going with your new podcast.
Great. Thanks, Mel. Bye.
Bye-bye.
It was so funny to have the tables turn with Mel interviewing me, but I'm very excited about the change. I'd love for you once again to do that review, post on LinkedIn as Mel suggested, which is a great idea. And most importantly, I want you to subscribe and get ready for lots of practical tips on sales. And we will have some fun and make it entertaining, as I said, but really some practical tips to help you accelerate your sales.
I'm fired up after today's episode. What about you? But hey, before you go, learning is just one piece of the puzzle. Now it's time to put today's strategy into action. Head over now to today's show page at paulhigginsmentoring.com/podcast and share how you'll put it into action. Be sure to head over to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe, rate, and review the show. Tell me what your favorite episode is. And don't wait 1 minute more to gain access to your pulse check at paulhigginsmentoring.com. This could be the difference between struggling to get more leads and making this next quarter your best one yet.